until at least the first few grandchildren are born. But what we're learning about today is the bare minimum. In other words, is it still okay? And I think in the last year, anybody that's made a wedding, but even if you've attended a wedding in the last year, we realized that a lot of the things that we thought we needed don't actually need per se. And so we're going to be learning the bare minimum. Is a wedding still a chuppah still considered a kosher chuppah? Excuse me, if these are the conditions under which the marriage is happening. I will tell you that my great grandparents, for example, got married in Siberia. The chuppah was similar to this. Borrowing a dress and using a small metal item as the wedding ring, etc. So the Rambam is not suggesting that you should use a donut as the wedding ring, but he's addressing the question: if that's all you have, is it okay? So let's go straight into it. Hilchos Ishus Perek Hey Halacha Aleph. Hamakadesh b'davar shu aser b'hano. Okay, so the consecration is the man symbolically gives his entire self through this item of minimal value, and the woman gives of herself entirely into the marriage. That's minimal value. Let's say it's an object which is forbidden to derive benefit. For example, a mixture of milk and meat, chametz pesach, or other objects from which it is prohibited to derive benefit. She is not consecrated. Even if the prohibition against deriving benefit from the object is merely rabbinic in origin, for example, chametz after 11 o'clock in the morning on Erev Pesach. Base. If a man transgresses and sells an article and consecrates the woman with the money he receives for it, the kiddushin is valid. Okay? So let's say I take chametz on Pesach and I sell it. That it was a forbidden act, but the money is mine. Let's say I use that money. She's mekudesh. There's one exception. If a person consecrates a woman with the money received for a false deity, so if I've sold an idol, the kedushin is invalid, for forbidden to derive benefit from the money received for a false deity, just as it is forbidden to derive benefit from the false deity itself. Okay, so the money takes on the same character as the original item of sale. When a man consecrates a woman with the dung of cows consecrated to a false deity, the kedushin are not valid, for it is forbidden to derive benefit from anything produced by entities consecrated to a false deity. As Deuteronomy states, let nothing that is condemned cling to your hand. Okay, so even if it's produced by the deity. If by contrast, and by the way, there's a South African energy company that's involved in an American energy company. I was talking recently to someone involved, and he explained to me that their next big thing, they've listed on the NASDAQ, their next big thing is that they're taking pig dung and transforming it, which is a high source of global warming, and they're transforming it into usable energy. So this is not a theoretical idea here. If by contrast a man consecrates a woman with the dung of an ox condemned to be stoned, the condition are binding. Why? Because although it is forbidden to derive benefit from an ox condemned to be stoned, it doesn't apply to its dung. For the dung is considered of negligible importance when compared to the ox. Not so when you're talking about the cow, that is a false deity. When a man consecrates a woman with the produce of the sabbatical year, okay, so it's during Shemitah, or with the ashes of the red heifer, with water that was drawn for the purpose of sprinkling the ashes of the red heifer, the kiddushin are valid. The following rules apply when a man consecrates a woman with property dedicated to the temple. If he was unaware that the property has been dedicated, the kiddushin are valid. You must give the value of the dedicated property and an additional fifth to the temple treasury and bring a guilt offering. Okay, so these are examples of prohibited transactions, but valid, as is required of all those who unwittingly make mundane use of property dedicated to the temple. Okay, that's the whole. If he consecrated the woman knowing that the property was dedicated, she is not consecrated. So if you didn't know, Me'ila, when you know is considered worse than Geneva, and that wouldn't even count. But if you didn't know, she's consecrated, but he has to repay. And just by the way, when he says repay a fifth, it does not mean 20%, it means 25%. Why? Because 25% over and above the capital would then be a fifth inclusive of the penalty. Okay? So for example, if it's worth 100 gold coins, he now has to give 25, because 25 would be a fifth of 125. When a man gets a woman with the produce of the second tithe, whether unknowingly or knowingly, the kedusha are not valid, for unless a person redeems this produce that doesn't belong to him, to use for his other purposes. In regard to this tithe, it says it is God's. Okay, so Meister Sheni, it's not good. How about a kohen? What about me? Kohen shekiddush bechalke with a share of offerings of the most sacred nature. So kachim, they have to be eaten in the Bet HaMikdash. Or his share of offerings of lesser sanctity, she is not consecrated. Why? Because it's given to the kohen for one purpose, for him to eat. Okay? Not so with other gifts to the kohen. When by contrast, the priest consecrates a woman with truma gdeila or trumas meiser, other types of truma, or with the bikurin, the first fruits, the kedushin are binding. The same applies when a Levi consecrates with meiser rishain, the first type which was given, or an Israelite consecrates with produce and the tithes of the poor. These are given to them, to the kohen, or to the Levi, or to the poor, for their own use at their discretion, and therefore it's usable. So the condition applies. The gifts required to be separated from produce that have not been separated are considered as if they have already been separated. Therefore, when an Israelite inherited produce from his maternal grandfather who was a priest, and none of the required gifts have been separated from their produce, he may separate the truma and the tithes and keep the portions to be given to the priests as his own. Why? It is as if he inherited the truma and the tithes from his maternal grandfather. Therefore, if he consecrates a woman with them, she is consecrated. Although they are not fit for the Israelite to eat, he has the right to sell them to someone for whom they are fit. He is allowed to do it. When, by contrast, an Israelite consecrates a woman with truma that he separates from his grain heap, the condition are not affected, for he does not have the right to sell this truma. He possesses merely the privilege of giving it to the priest of his choice, and this privilege is not considered to be money. Okay, Zion. The following rules apply when a person consecrates a woman with property that he robbed, stole, or took against its owner's will. Okay, let's say proper ganef. If the owner has despaired of the return of the article and it is known that the man acquired it through the owner's despair, the consecration is effective. If not, it is not valid. It's important to remember here what the Rambam is saying, that there is a point when a thief acquires an item as his own, and that is when the owner gives up on it. That does not in any way permit it, and he can be required to sell it back to the owner and give back the money and give back double. It's just saying that once it passes the transition point of ownership, he can use it for marriage. Somebody who goes into someone's home, takes something, and consecrates a woman, she's not consecrated. Even when the other owner comes home and says, why don't you give her a more valuable article than the one you gave her? He is making the statement only to prevent the person from being shamed, and it doesn't reflect his true intent. In other words, if I haven't given it to you, it is not yours. And since the man consecrated a woman with property belonging to a colleague without the colleague's knowledge, this is robbery, and the woman is not consecrated. If the man consecrated the woman with an article that the owner would not object to being taken, in other words, a date or a nut, the status of the Kedushin is in doubt. That's why you'll notice under the chuppah, the officiating rabbi will ask the groom, is this yours? Confirming that it's his. Did you pay for it with your own money, etc.? When a person owns merchandise in partnership with a colleague and divides the merchandise without his colleague's knowledge, using it to consecrate a woman, the Kiddushin are not valid. Okay, so let's say I own a diamond in partnership with someone else. I sell the diamond, take half the money, the other half I'm obviously going to give to the other partner. It's still not good. The division, meaning an evaluation by the court, is necessary, and one partner may not take what he wants as his own and leave the remainder for his colleague. That's not the way to divide an asset. Yud, the following rules apply when a person robbed or stole an article from a woman who took it without her consent, and afterwards consecrated her with the article that he took from her, saying, behold, you are consecrated to me with this. Okay? If they were already engaged and she took the article in silence, she's consecrated. Why? Because in her silence, she is confirming that she doesn't mind him having taken it. And if ever there was never an engagement and it's just a marriage on the fly, she's not consecrated. If she's inside when they give the article to the Kedushin, because the silence is not indicative. If, however, she explicitly agreed to the Kedushin, then she is consecrated. Similar concepts apply when a man entrusts an article to a woman for safekeeping and tells her, take care of this article. And afterwards tells her, behold, you are consecrated with this. If he told her this before she took possession of the article and she took it in silence, she is consecrated. If, however, he made a second statement after she had accepted the article for the purpose of safekeeping and she remains silent, the Kiddushin are not valid. For when a woman remains silent after money has been given, the Kiddushin, she is consecrated, even though she made a statement after accepting the article. Okay, so the Rambam is here giving us an understanding of what the silence would say in terms of him using an article that she was holding of his, or in the previous article of hers that he had taken. Yud Beis, Hechsel HaChayv, when the man pays a debt that he owed a woman, and upon paying it, he says, you are consecrated with it. Right? If the two were engaged, the man made a statement before she accepted the money, she accepted it in silence, she is consecrated. Why? Because she is accepting this, knowing what's going on. So again, the Rambam is taking the idea of shidduchin, of the engagement beforehand, as a level of understanding beyond, meaning obviously, as we learned in the first chapter, a woman is never married unless she wants to. It's always only by her will. He's referring here to the transactional element of the consecration and the ownership of the object being used, and he's saying that the engagement lends itself to certain levels of understanding. If he states his desire to consecrate her after she accepted the payment of debt, she is not consecrated, even if she explicitly agrees. For nothing has been given her, she merely took what was rightfully hers. The debt he owed was repaid when she took the money. She cannot demand repayment again. In other words, this question is only applies if it was done beforehand. If you have any questions, by the way, please feel free to ask as we go through. Okay. Yud Gimel. When a man consecrates a woman with a debt, even with a debt that is recorded in a promissory note, she is not consecrated. What do we mean? Let's say the woman owes the man a dinner. If he tells her, behold, you are consecrated to me with the dinner that you owe me, she is not consecrated. The rationale is that a loan is given to be spent, and there is nothing that presently exists for her to derive benefit from it to accept as Kedushin, for she has, or it is as if she has already spent that dinner and has derived benefit from it already. In other words, once I give you a loan, that money is no longer existent until the time that you pay it back to me. But there's nothing left in our engagement that can be utilized as capital towards this exercise. Yudalit. A different rule applies, however, when she is given her a loan and received collateral for it. If he consecrates her with the loan and returns the collateral she is consecrated, for she derives benefit from the collateral from that time onward, and thus as a result of the kiddushin, she has derived benefit, even though the benefit is minimal. But when a man consecrates a woman with the benefit derived from a loan, the consecration is valid. What do we mean? What is implied? The consecration is binding. If he lends her 200 zuz at the time of the kiddushin and then tells her, "Behold, you are consecrated to me, zman, through the benefit you receive by my extending this length of the loan for you. It may be in your possession for so many days, and I won't demand payment until this date. She is receiving benefit now from the opportunity to use the loan until the end of the time period fixed." In other words, and here the Rambam is going to touch on the condition, because it's like taking interest. Because at the end of the day, it's the value that he's using to marry her is the value of the time. But on the other hand, Torah tells us that you're not allowed to make benefit out of the time attached to money. So my teachers interpret the expression benefit derived from a loan in a way that is not okay. And tells the one, "Behold, you're consecrated with this pruta, and with the debt that you owe me, she is consecrated." Even though that wouldn't have worked, but because he's giving her something of minimal value, it's enough. Similarly, if he tells her, "But you're consecrated with the debt you owe me, and with this pruta," again, the consecration is binding. Yud Zayin, and the consecration is binding. Yud Ches. The following rules apply when a man consecrates a woman with an object that he has entrusted to her for safekeeping, or with an article that he has lent her. If the entrusted object or borrowed article is worth a pruta and it exists within her property, she is consecrated. The marriage is good. Okay, now here the Rambam takes it into an interesting way. He says the following rule applies when a man tells a woman, "Behold, you are consecrated to me," in consideration of my speaking to the ruling authorities on your behalf. I'm going to pull some protexia for you. Although the man did speak to the ruling authorities on her behalf, and his words had an effect causing him to refrain from prosecuting her, she is not consecrated unless he gives her a pruta of his own. The rationale is that the benefit that she receives from his speaking on her behalf is regarded as a loan. When one consecrates a woman with a loan, the kiddushin are not binding. So again, it wouldn't work. Chaf. The following rule applies when a man tells a woman, "Behold, you are consecrated to me in return for the work that I will perform on your behalf." Although the man indeed performs the work he promised, he is not consecrated unless he gives her a pruta of his own. Okay, so it can't be theoretical work. The rationale is that a worker earns his wages continuously from the time he begins working until the end. As he performs a portion of his work, he earns an equivalent portion of his wages. Thus, in the above situation, the man's wages are considered to be a debt that she owes him. And when one consecrates a woman with a loan, the kiddushin are not binding. So wages are automatically transferred into the status of loan. Interesting. Chaf Aleph, 21. The following rule applies when a woman tells a man, "Give so-and-so a present and I will be consecrated to you." If he tells her, "Behold, you are consecrated to me for the sake of the present I gave upon your request," the kiddushin are not binding. Okay? In other words, that he's doing something. Although she personally didn't receive, the Kiddushin are binding. Although she didn't receive anything, she derives benefit from the fact that her will was carried out, and the other derived benefit because of her. So if she tells the guy, bring flowers to my mother for Shabbos and you'll be married to me through that, that is good. Similarly, she told him, give a dinner to so-and-so as a present and I will be consecrated to him. The Kiddushin are binding, provided the person who receives the present tells the woman, behold, you are consecrated to me by virtue of the pleasure you derived from the present that I received at your request. That's quite an exercise of creative thinking of bringing in the third party. Similarly, Amrullah, if the man tells a woman, take this dinner as a present to become consecrated to so-and-so, the Kiddushin are binding, provided that the other person tells her, well, you are consecrated to me by virtue of the benefit you receive on my behalf, despite the fact that he himself did not give her anything. In other words, this tells us a very powerful law. The critical issue here is that the woman receives benefit, and it's not even that it's coming out of his pocket. The following rule applies when a woman tells a man, take this dinner as a present and I'll become consecrated to you. He receives the present and tells her, behold, you are consecrated to me by virtue of the pleasure you received in my accepting a present from you. If he is an important person, she is consecrated, for she derives satisfaction from the fact that Mr. Important has benefited from her, and for the sake of the satisfaction, she consecrates herself to him. I will say that today, practically, there is a concept in the secular world of exchanging rings, and halachically we are generally very particular that the woman does not give the man a ring under the chuppah in order to be clear, because these are obviously not ideal situations. When a man tells a woman to become consecrated to me with a dinner, take this article of security until I give you the dinner, she's not consecrated to him, for she didn't receive the dinner and the security was not given to her for it to be her own. So what she has now is not hers. If the man has in his possession security that he was given for a debt that a third party owes him, and he gives a woman the security as Kiddushin, the consecration is binding, although the security doesn't belong to him. For a creditor has certain rights with regard to the ownership of security. So the ownership of security that he has is more valuable than a credit, that as a debt is more valuable than a gift for which he's giving her a collateral. When a man tells a woman, behold, you're consecrated to me with this dinner on condition you return it to me, she is not consecrated, regardless of whether or not she returns it. Why? For if she does not return it, this condition will not be met. If she does return it, she will not have derived any benefit, for she will have not received anything. Chafei. Nasana aguda shalhadas. We believe him that he didn't know. Sorry, Stephen. So your question is, when a property consecrated which already been dedicated to the temple, is he believed that? No, he is believed, unless we have reason to say otherwise because of witnesses. He is believed, and the marriage would be okay, but he would still need to pay the fine. These rulings were issued with regard to the following instances. A man gave a woman a wreath, a hadas, and told her, behold, you're consecrated with this. She accepted it, but protested, saying, it is not worth a pruta. And he responded, become consecrated with the 4 zuz that are hidden in the wreath. In other words, when she accepted it, she didn't realize that it was worth a pruta. If she says, yes, she is consecrated, if she remains silent, she's not consecrated with her money. For remaining silent after money has been given is of no consequence. There is nonetheless a doubt, perhaps the Kiddushin are valid, lest the wreath be worth a pruta in another place. So that's the practical ramification. He says, become consecrated me with a date, with this one. become consecrated to me with this one. If one of them is worth a pruta, she's consecrated. If not, the kiddushin are again of doubtful status. The viability stemming only for the possibility that one of them be considered to be worth a pruta in Chav Zayin. If he tells her, become consecrated to me with this one, and with this one, and with this one, if together they're worth a pruta, she is consecrated, but if not, it is doubtful. She eats the dates one after another as he gives them to her. Okay, so there's never a time that she has the full pruta. If the last date is worth a pruta, she's consecrated. But if not, again, the condition is doubtful, for the dates that she ate are considered to be alone. When a man consecrates alone, the condition are valid, meaning they're not here anymore. Thus, the status of the condition depends solely on the worth of the final date. 28. Amarla, if he tells her, if he tells her the condition are binding if all the dates together are worth a pruta, this applies even when she eats dates one after another as he gives them to her. She is consecrated. Why? Because she's eating her own property. So when he gives her the whole pile of dates at once, then it's okay. The following rules apply when a man tells a woman, behold, you are consecrated to me with this cup. If it is filled with water, the consecration depends on the combined value of the cup and its contents. If it is filled with wine, however, consecration depends on the value of the cup itself, but not its contents. Why? Because wine is so valuable that unless he stipulated this cup of wine, and he said only the cup, the wine has enough of an identity of its own that it remains separate to the cup. If it is filled with oil, on the other hand, the consecration depends on the value of the contents, but not the cup itself. Therefore, if the oil is not worth a pruta, the status of the kiddushin is doubtful. And if the oil is worth a pruta, she is consecrated, and no attention is paid to the value of the cup. Any questions?
Rabbi, there's so much in there. I wouldn't know where to start. I think I'd have to read it a good couple of times. That'll keep me busy for a while.
Okay.
Rabbi, we should overlook the fact that obviously this has to still be with witnesses.
All of this goes without saying that if ever a kiddushin is done without two witnesses designated for the purpose of kiddushin, the wedding is out. To be clear, there's a fundamental difference between the witnesses of a Jewish wedding and anything else in Jewish law. Generally speaking, the purpose of witnesses in Jewish law are edei birur, which is witnesses for the purpose of clarification. In other words, they're clarifying a truth for us. The witnesses of a wedding are edei kiyum. They create the status. Their witnessing of the wedding makes it. Okay? So, if, for example, one witness means nothing. In Jewish law, one witness is always worth something. Maybe it's not enough, doesn't carry enough weight, but at least you know there's some assumption that the act happened. Here, let's say there's the bride, the groom, and someone else. All three of them are saying, we got married, we're married, mazel tov. Doesn't matter. If there aren't two kosher witnesses there to create the marriage, it doesn't come into play. Any other questions?
Rabbi, there was a part there about chazaka, about if, I'm not quite can't remember exactly the circumstances.
If the person has,
sorry?
Yeah. If the person has chazaka over it, meaning when you give something, it has to be yours completely. It can't be something which is of questionable ownership.
If the disputed ownership has lost interest, or does it apply after 3 years automatically, or what is that?
No, so that's a separate area of Jewish law. When exactly the chazaka won't kick in, but where that all comes into play here is that if the ownership of the original owner is of questionable value, then the transfer of ownership is also questionable. And because it's a transaction which is creating the marriage is not questionable.
Yeah.
That's why it has to be without this.
Yeah.
Okay. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rambam. Cheers,
Thank you,
everyone.
Rabbi. You too.
Shabbos.